Horror movies thrive on a strange contradiction. We watch them to be scared, but we also watch them to have fun. The fear is controlled, the terror carefully constructed to give us a rush without real danger. And when the credits roll, we walk away satisfied, maybe even exhilarated. And the movies know this. Whether it's Michael Myers lurking in the shadows, the unsettling red coat in Don't Look Now, or the eerie glow of the TV in The Ring, horror films play with our expectations, building dread but always giving us some kind of payoff. And then there's funny games. No jump scares, no thrilling chases, no stylized gore, just silence, stillness, and something far more unsettling. A long, static shot of an empty living room, a character staring directly into the camera as if he's looking right at us. Why does this feel so much worse than anything else we just talked about? Michael Haneke's Funny Games isn't a horror movie in the traditional sense. It doesn't entertain. It doesn't offer release or catharsis. It doesn't even let you enjoy the violence. So, what is Haneke doing here? Is this a film made out of contempt for its audience? Or is he simply forcing us to confront something we'd rather ignore? Before we attempt to answer that, let's discuss the film's plot. A well-to-do family, George, Anna, and their young son, arrives at their lakeside vacation home, ready for a quiet getaway. Shortly after settling in, two polite but unsettling young men, Peter and Paul, show up at their door, initially asking to borrow some eggs.
Sie ist gerade am Kochen und die Eier sind ja ausgegangen und jetzt lässt sie fragen, ob Sie ihr nicht vielleicht aushelfen könnten.
Their behavior quickly turns strange, and before the family fully grasps what's happening, the men take them hostage. What follows is a long, excruciating ordeal. Peter and Paul, treating the situation as a cruel game, toy with the family both physically and psychologically. They make casual small talk.
Wenn das Handy nicht erreichbar ist, dann kommen Sie auch so.
Darf man lügen?
Impose arbitrary rules.
Sie wetten mit uns, dass Sie morgen um 9 noch leben, wir mit Ihnen, dass Sie tot sind. Okay.
And repeatedly break any expectations of mercy or logic. The violence is never sensationalized. Haneke forces us to sit in the aftermath rather than the act itself. Horror films operate on a kind of unspoken contract. They might scare us, disturb us, even shock us, but they also give us something in return. Fear comes with excitement. Suffering comes with catharsis. Even the bleakest horror films tend to follow a rhythm that reassures us, whether through a final girl's triumph, a villain's defeat, or just the simple relief of the credits rolling. No matter how much we're put through, we leave with the feeling that the experience had a purpose. Take Wes Craven's Scream, for example. It pokes fun at horror conventions, but it still delivers the thrills of a classic slasher. Chases, witty banter, mostly satisfying kills, and all of it. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a relentless, nerve-shredding nightmare, but it's also kinetic, filled with high-energy sequences, and it ultimately gives us an iconic final girl moment as Sally escapes into the sunrise. Even something as violent as Saw follows a structured, almost game-like logic. Jigsaw's victims have choices, and their suffering, as brutal as it is, fits into a system that gives the audience a kind of twisted satisfaction. But Funny Games? It doesn't play by any of those rules. There's no stylized violence, no eerie score to shape our emotions, no moment of righteous revenge. The most horrific acts don't even happen on screen. Instead, we're just left with the aftermath. Long, agonizing silences and lingering shots that force us to sit in discomfort. When characters suffer, there's no dramatic cutaway or distracting orchestral swell. There's just stillness, emptiness. Perhaps the best example of this is when Anna is left alone in the living room after her son is killed. In any other horror film, this would be a moment of high tension. She'd be plotting her escape, trying to call for help, maybe even preparing for a last stand. But Haneke lets the camera sit there, watching her struggle. Minutes pass. She doesn't break free right away. She doesn't suddenly become a resourceful action hero version of herself. She just exists in her suffering, and we're forced to sit there with her. And then there's the moment that everyone remembers, a remote control rewind. And it does finally fight back, grabbing a shotgun and taking control for the first time in the entire film. It's the moment every horror movie primes us for, the moment where the tables turn, where the final girl gets her revenge. But Haneke doesn't just take that moment away, he erases it. As Paul grabs the remote, he rewinds time and undoes her victory.
Das hättest du nicht tun sollen, Anna. Die Spielregel bricht man nicht. Tut mir leid, du hast versagt.
The film lays its cards on the table. There will be no catharsis here. No justice, no hope. And that's because this isn't just a horror movie. This is Haneke being a provocateur and asking why we watch horror movies in the first place. It is a moment that is as unforgettable as it is divisive. In traditional horror films, violence is a tool of thrill and excitement. It's often quick, stylish, and presented with a sense of almost playful danger. Halloween and Scream might show us bloody stabbings, but they also build suspense in a way that's designed to get our hearts racing, not to make us uncomfortable. Even in the most brutal moments, there's a kind of thrilling rush, like a roller coaster we know we can safely get off of when the ride ends. The violence, however disturbing, is often tied to the thrill of the chase, the fear of the unknown, or the satisfying defeat of the villain. Then there's the more extreme films, embodied by titles like Saw and Hostel. These films take violence and make it graphic, grotesque, and explicitly uncomfortable. But even here, the violence is often framed within a larger narrative, a form of justice or a moral lesson. The character's suffering is not without reason. There's a catharsis to be gained by seeing those who, quote, deserve to suffer meet their fate, often through a twisted form of retribution. There's something strangely gratifying in witnessing these acts, whether we agree with the character's moral compass or not. But Funny Games is different. Haneke doesn't use violence to thrill, to excite, or to even punish those who deserve it. He uses violence to frustrate, to trap us in the moment with no escape. The violence in Funny Games is slow, excruciating, and leaves no room for release. The killers, Peter and Paul, have no clear motive beyond their sadistic enjoyment, and the audience is forced to bear witness to every agonizing second. There's no quick, satisfying death or cathartic final showdown, just the suffocating weight of violence that drags on, almost painfully so. The aforementioned remote control scene is where Haneke's true subversion of violence takes place. It's not just about denying us a satisfying resolution, it's about making us confront the idea that we, as the audience, are complicit in the violence. Haneke asks, why do we crave these moments of triumph in horror films? Why do we want the suffering to end, the killers punished, the victims to fight back and win?
Gründe liefern, dass ich einverstanden bin, dass jemand liquidiert wird. Ja? Und das hat auch funktioniert. Also das war auch so ein Moment, wo ich gesagt, da habe ich sie gekriegt.
By literally rewinding the film and erasing the moment of control, Haneke forces us to realize that there is no real justice in this world. There's no redemption to be had. And that's the real horror, the feeling of helplessness. The brutal awareness that, in Haneke's world, the heroes don't get to win. The good guys here don't get a satisfying conclusion. The violence isn't just a part of the story, it is the story. It's a never-ending cycle, witnessed by the film's ending, wherein our antagonists are off to the next house for more funny games. It's a brutal circle that we're all caught in, whether we want to be or not. Haneke's weaponization of violence doesn't just affect the characters on the screen, it forces us, the audience, to feel the full weight of it. Many viewers interpret Funny Games as a direct attack on audiences who enjoy violent films, and it's easy to see why. Haneke refuses to allow any form of traditional catharsis or satisfaction, and his characters endure an excruciating, seemingly endless suffering. But does that mean Haneke hates his audience? Or is he merely confronting us with an uncomfortable truth about our consumption of violence in cinema? One way to approach this question is to compare Haneke's film with the work of other directors who also explore violence in their films. Take Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange, for example. The violence is stylized, yes, but Kubrick uses it to critique the ways society glamorizes and normalizes brutality. It's not the violence itself that he's celebrating, but the way we, as viewers, are complicit in enjoying it. The violence becomes a commentary on societal decadence and the human propensity to seek out aggression in entertainment. Quentin Tarantino takes violence to a more playful, cathartic extreme. In Kill Bill, violence is fun. It's stylized, over the top, and deliberately attached from real-world consequences. It's a celebration of the genre, a kind of cinematic revenge fantasy where the audience is meant to enjoy the spectacle of the violence without guilt or reflection. But Haneke's approach is radically different. His violence is neither exciting nor entertaining. It's slow, deliberate, and overwhelmingly uncomfortable. He gives us no release, no chance to enjoy what we're witnessing. Haneke doesn't stylize his violence or make it visually appealing. The tension never breaks. And perhaps most crucially, there's no space for the audience to feel distanced from what's happening on screen. We're not invited to revel in the violence. Instead, we are forced to reckon with the full weight of it. To further contrast Haneke's approach, we can look at the work of my favorite Japanese director, Takeshi Kitano. Kitano is known for films like Sonatine, Fireworks, and Violent Cop. His violence is sudden and stark and often really uncomfortable, but it's never glorified. Death comes quickly, without the stylized choreography or exaggerated brutality we might expect in a typical action film. It's realistic, almost casual, and it lacks the grandiose theatrics often associated with cinematic violence of men like John Woo. Unlike Haneke, however, Kitano's films allow for moments of reflection, beauty, and even humor. In Fireworks, for instance, there's a serene moment where the one character paints in quiet solitude, a peaceful respite from the film's violent world. Kitano doesn't moralize his violence, nor does he try to make it enjoyable. He presents it as an undeniable part of life, ugly, abrupt, and irreversible. But there's room for humanity in his stories. His characters, despite their violent actions, are complex, often filled with sorrow, confusion, or existential contemplation. Haneke, however, offers no such room for humanity. His violence is a tool of intellectual provocation. It's not simply there to shock us or to explore the consequences of violence. It's there to make us face the fact that we, as viewers, are complicit in the enjoyment of on-screen brutality. Haneke refuses to offer moments of release, forcing us to sit with the discomfort of what we're watching. He traps us in the world of the film, and we can't look away. This is the key difference between Haneke and Kitano. While both directors seemingly reject the glorification of violence, they approach it from different perspectives. Kitano presents violence as a brutal reality, a part of the world that we must accept, but he also leaves room for reflection, for pauses in the chaos. His films are ultimately existential, acknowledging the violence as something ugly but inescapable. Haneke, on the other hand, uses violence as a weapon to make the audience confront their own complicity, turning the violence into an intellectual exercise rather than an emotional experience. While Kitano might give us space to breathe, Haneke demands that we face the consequences of our voyeuristic tendencies, without ever offering relief. Funny Games is the ultimate subversion of the horror genre, not just a critique, but a complete dismantling of it. While other films might leave us with a lingering sense of fear or unease, such as It Comes at Night or The Strangers, they still adhere to some form of horror movie convention. They give us something to hold on to, a glimpse of hope, a desire for justice, or at least a sliver of resolution. In those films, the horror still feels like horror. But Funny Games doesn't even give us that. Haneke strips away every instinctual craving we have for release. There's no satisfying resolution. There's no hero, no villain to conquer, no triumph to cheer. Even in its most brutal moments, Haneke refuses to let us off the hook. Haneke doesn't just challenge the genre's conventions, he obliterates them. The real horror in Funny Games isn't what happens on screen. It's the uncomfortable awareness that we, the audience, are complicit in this suffering. We chose to watch this. We sat through every drawn-out moment, every agonizing second of violence. And Haneke made sure that we didn't enjoy a single one of them. That's what makes it brilliant. The film isn't just about what's happening to the characters, it's about us. Haneke forces us to confront our relationship with violence in film. He asks us why we crave this kind of entertainment, why we want to see suffering, why we expect to be rewarded with catharsis. And by the end of the film, we realize that there is no reward. There's only the horror of understanding that we wanted to be entertained by something that we should have never wanted in the first place. Ready to perform another postmortem on a classic film? You'll find a link to another one of my videos here on the screen. I hope to see you over there.